KDKA, this is Cars, Stars, and everything in between. He's the star, Richard Bazzi, Schultz Ford, SchultzFord.com. I'm Bubba from 100.7 Star, and our star today has a resume that I could read on and on and on. David Leaf is a Peabody and WGAW award-winning writer, director, producer, creative visionary. I could go on. And you're a friend of Richard Bazzi's. David Leaf, welcome.
Thank you. But please go on and on.
You directed the feature documentary on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Dion. You did so much, and you're friends with Richard Bazzi.
You didn't have to say that again.
David, welcome.
Good to see you guys.
Good to see you too.
David, when I spoke to you last week and I reached out after so long, I mean, the dialogue, the banter back and forth is still there. It's almost like it never left. And I'm going to tell you, probably for anybody that cares, it's been, David, could it have been 30 years that's passed?
42.
David, that's almost unbelievable.
Wow.
It's almost unbelievable. And I guess that tells me how old I am, but I continue to deny that. But David, I met you and I don't remember your title at Caesar's Palace Productions.
It's the director of development for Caesar's Palace Productions.
Right. And your supervisor at that time was a guy named Tony Verna. Right?
That's correct.
And Tony Verna,
legendary sports director.
Boy, he'd love you for saying that, wouldn't he?
Well, he was. He was the first guy to use the instant replay.
He was. And that's controversial too, though, right?
A little bit, but so if he was the second, that's still pretty amazing. Anyway, we're here to talk about Brian Wilson and me and Bubba and the Pirates, because I still remember where I was when Mazeroski hit the shot. So
well, you are older than me, so you must remember that. But David, and you are a baseball fan. David, it's unbelievable, because the reason I reached out to you was because I think of Brian Wilson's passing, and I knew how close you were to Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys, and that you had a special relationship with Brian. And it appears that you're probably or at least one of the very only people in the world that he completely trusted. And I knew that it would be a very difficult time for you. And I wanted to reach out because, of course, I connected with that. And I can remember you coming to Lake Tahoe, where I worked for Caesars, and for a Beach Boys show. Do you remember that?
I remember many things about, even though it's a long time ago, but really it's my relationship more with Brian than the Beach Boys. Because when I moved to California in '75, it was with this insane idea that I was going to write a book about Brian Wilson, become his friend, and help him finish Smile. And it actually came true. And more than what matters is that I became his friend. And it was because he felt unconditional love. The people in his life who he trusted were the ones who loved him, not because he made hit records, but just because of who he was.
So, David, as somebody as close to Brian Wilson as you were, who was Brian Wilson?
Brian Wilson would tell you that he was a regular guy who had a gift from God, and that he believed that, like, his greatest musical hero was Johann Sebastian Bach, and that he was writing spiritual music. Brian said music is the voice of God. And so it was it didn't really matter what the subject matter was. He could be writing about surfing or cars or girls. That wasn't the issue. When you listen to In My Room, when you listen to The Warmth of the Sun or Don't Worry Baby or God Only Knows, certainly.
God Only Knows is Paul McCartney said God Only Knows is the greatest song ever written. Paul McCartney said that.
Well, actually, I know that because he said it to me in an interview I did with him in 1990 for the reissue of Pet Sounds on CD. And he has said it in other ways in other places, but I think that might have been the first time he had said it, in a big way,
in a public setting.
Yes, but here's a couple of other things to consider when we talk about how influential Brian was on the Beatles. And if you were influential on the Beatles, that meant you were influential on the world. Sir George Martin said to me, and the public, he said many years ago, he said, if I had to select one living genius of popular music, it would be Brian Wilson. Now, this is the guy who was in the studio with John, Paul, George, and Ringo saying that.
Right?
Wow. He also said that Sgt. Pepper was our attempt, accent on attempt, to equal Pet Sounds.
That's amazing.
I read that. Now, David, tell me about Pet Sounds. What was the...
So Pet Sounds was, from 62 through 65, the Beach Boys put out a bunch of extremely successful albums. And it was in 65 that Brian said, I've had enough of touring. I've had enough of writing about things that are more maybe ephemeral. I want to write about my feelings. And he started doing that seriously on the Beach Boys Today album. And after he heard Rubber Soul, as he tells the story, as he told the story, he was smoking some pot and he listened to Rubber Soul for the first time. And he thought, I'm going to make the greatest album ever. And Pet Sounds was the next record he made. And I refer to it as his emotional autobiography. There are sounds and feelings and thoughts expressed on that record that were just, it was from start to finish, with the exception of Sloop John B., which was there at the record company's insistence because it had just been a top 5 hit. So Pet Sounds was it. And the British went absolutely crazy for this record. The Americans who heard it loved it. Capitol Records actually sort of sabotaged it.
What?
Because
why would they?
Well, they didn't want Brian to go in this direction. They wanted, as their product manager said to Brian, we all love the new record, Brian, but can't you give us something more like California Girls? And Brian's answer was, no, I'm doing what I'm doing.
Because he's an artist.
He's an artist. That is the key issue, Bubba. It's the issue between art and commerce. And the Beach Boys, who had become this magnificent vocal instrument, are on the road touring. That's how they're making their living. Brian's in the studio creating these soundscapes for them to come home and sing to. And there wasn't exactly a joyous reception, shall we say, in 66 when they came off the road and heard it for the first time. But what Capitol Records did was they shipped 300,000 copies of the album to record stores. And when record stores ordered more after they had sold out what they had, Capitol Records shipped something called Best of the Beach Boys. As the product manager told me, he said, well, we had to make quota. We had to make sales quota. So there was this dichotomy in America as to who and what the Beach Boys were. Now, Brian then went to work on the next single, which was Good Vibrations, originally recorded for the Pet Sounds album. And then he said, no, I'm going to put that aside. I've got another idea for that. And he spent a couple of months working on this single, doing this thing called modular recording. He recorded bits and pieces of the song and then, fit it together like this magnificent jigsaw puzzle. And it went to number 1 worldwide, world million seller.
Wow. David, let's continue this conversation. This is Cars, Stars, and Everything in Between. More with David Leaf when we return. Stand by. This is
David, I can close my eyes and transform back, as you said, 42 years. You and I don't know if you remember like I do, because I was so enamored with the whole lifestyle and with the Beach Boys. And I can tell you that I feel like we talked almost every day at that time. In both
You know, Dick, I honestly, my last memory of seeing you was when you called and said, "I gotta get those the tapes and the manuscripts back," and we went to my storage area and got it.
Wow.
I'll tell you that story another time.
Here we go. I'm just waiting for this first break to save, and we'll pick up where we left off. I'll give you a quick intro. Stand by, and here we go. 100.1 FM, AM 1020 KDK. This is Cars, Stars, and Everything in Between. I'm going to cut my intro short because I want to get right back into this conversation with David Leaf, talking about Brian Wilson and how they were like sabotaging his album and how they sent out other albums. So this is just an amazing story that I'm guessing anybody, like a friend of mine, her name is Susie. She is the biggest Brian Wilson fan I've ever met. She's got a podcast, and I gave her a heads up that I was talking to you, and she was losing her mind over this. And I bet you like these are the things that only the biggest Brian Wilson fans would have ever even known about, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've written about it in my books. But for the most part, you'd have to be pretty down the rabbit hole to know this stuff. What mattered is Brian was living it, and after Good Vibrations was a success, he was hard at work on what was going to be the next album, which Van Dyke Parks and his collaborator, and he named Smile, and that was really a road too far for everybody. And when Brian shelved that, it was kind of the end. Now it's amazing. I mean, I wrote an entire book about it because it was such a landmark moment in his life when he did it. I mean, it's called Smile: The Rise, Fall, and Resurrection of Brian Wilson, because he put it on the shelf in 1967 and he took it off the shelf and performed it in 2004.
Wow.
As a dear friend of his, David Anderley, said, the longest gestation period in history. The guy,
Wow.
Yeah, the guy gets pregnant in 66 and has the baby in 2004.
Wow.
Another writer, Randy Lewis, said that Mozart was born, lived, died, created his entire body of work in less time than it took for Brian to finish Smile. That's a big deal. It was the holy grail of rock and roll.
David, one of my very favorite songs of the Beach Boys, and I love the Beach Boys, as you know. But one of my very favorite songs was Brian alone and called Your Imagination. And where does that song fit into this? Where was this all after that?
So what happens is Brian has something of a breakdown when he shelves Smile because it meant so much to him. There was so much pushback. He was taking so many drugs. In my book, I think there are 13 reasons as to why it was shelved, 6 of them from Brian alone. And so from 67 to 1998, when the Imagination album comes out, which has the song you're talking about, Dick, there's just a roller coaster of a life. He's making music. Some of it makes it onto Beach Boys albums. Some of it just ends up in the vaults. He's just adrift. I mean, in 1971, he wrote a song called Till I Die. It's one of the most beautiful and saddest songs you could ever hear. It was if he had given up on life. Yeah. And in the 1980s, he ended up in what he described as 9 years in prison with this strange psychologist who had taken complete control of his life. And in the 1990s, he finally, I was among the people who helped him escape from prison, if you will, and began the happiest and most productive years of his post Beach Boys life. And he had a second act that nobody expected. that included his first solo album, Imagination. He went on tour, which nobody ever thought he would do. He did Pet Sounds Live. He then did Brian Wilson Presents Smile. He did a new rock opera. He did a Gershwin album. It was just a remarkable thing to witness.
Wow. And I think that the average person is probably either watching or listening to this interview. I think the average person, not somebody who's a big fan, but just the average person that thinks Beach Boys would be shocked by all of this information that you're providing. I don't think they understood the quality and depth of his art.
What was it, David, that drove you so hard that this was such? It was your life. You made this your life.
It was looking back as now I'm the silver-haired elder statesman of Brian Wilson history, his authorized biographer, if you will. I've written more words about him than anybody else alive. When I was in college and I read this story in Rolling Stone in 1971, it was a time of youthful outrage, if you will. And my roommate and I in the dorm, we went down, we just kept reading about him and listening to the music. And I was so angry at what had happened to him. And my roommate said, well, if you're so angry, do something about it. And that's when I decided I was going to move to California, write a book about Brian Wilson, become his friend, and help finish Smile. It was not something I was planning. I was a sports writer. I was a sportscaster. That's where I was headed. I wanted to be Marv Albert without the cross dressing.
So through this process, what did you find the connection between like creativity and mental health? Because there always seems to be some kind of balance there.
So, Bubba, that's a great question, because my sense is this guy was abused as a child, physically, emotionally, and verbally abused by his father, who became the Beach Boys' first manager and their publisher. And my sense is that music was his escape, as Van Dyke Parks, his friend said, his escape, best friend, lover. It's the only thing that never betrayed him.
Wow.
And so music, I think the depth of his music is a direct result of the unhappy life that he lived. And so we feel it. We're the lucky recipients of the joy that he put into the music. But there was a melancholy strain of it right from the beginning. The lonely sea, in my room, the warmth of the sun, don't worry, babe. There was something there that was unlike anything that was in popular music. And that's why, he got a call, from John and Paul when Pet Sounds came out. He says, we've just heard the album. It's great. It was the first time he ever heard from them or ever talked to them.
That's amazing.
David, I honestly, just listening to you talk, wow. I mean, thank you so much. This is really so enlightening. They were my heroes. And I think that was part of the reason I really gravitated towards you. They really were my heroes. I loved them. That they represented and embodied everything I wanted. I wanted to be a California guy. I wanted to move to the coast. I wanted to be, rich and famous. I wanted all that. And they were the people. They were the ones that gave me that inspiration. I could never be a blonde-haired Beach Boy. I just couldn't be that
either. But I heard Surf City. 2 girls for every boy. I couldn't get a date. 2 girls for every boy.
Wow.
I'm going there. But no, seriously. I mean, the world has lost the giant, and you've seen the outpouring of what he meant to the world. And you can go to his website and see all the tributes. I lost a friend who honestly, he hasn't been well in recent times, and it's been difficult to watch him going downhill. But we were not surprised by his passing. We were shocked. We're heartbroken. But he's been on this journey. He made it to 82. I mean, nobody really thought he was going to make it to 42. So it's a remarkable legacy that he leaves us, and he's not gone. He's in the music.
It's not even generational, David. It's because generational would slot it into one time frame. This is not. This has no bounds.
Bigger than that.
This is every
Yeah,
generation.
yeah. Right behind me is the classroom I teach in at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music, and in future years, I mean, I teach a course called Good and Bad Vibrations, but in future years, when students are taking classical music courses and they hear Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and Chopin, Brian Wilson will be in that class too. That's who he is.
That's amazing. David, thank
What
you.
a wonderful gift that you can give that.
What's that, Dick?
What a wonderful gift that you're able to give that gift to everybody that comes through those doors.
Thank you. Thank you. He gave us the gift, and you've got 50,000 watts putting it out.
I'm
David,
sorry. I know it's a difficult time for you, and I'm sorry for that. But
thank you.
You were so fortunate, and you've allowed
Thank
us to be fortunate.
Yeah, so much. David Leaf, thank you for being on Car Stars and everything in between.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, David.